WTMA. This is Tara on TMA.
Good morning. Joining me now is Mark Sanford in studio, the one and only.
Pleasure to be with you.
Yes, first interview since the trespassing, I don't know what to call them, allegations broke. I've got a lot of questions for you.
Sure.
On this. Let me start with this. And we're going to get to policy stuff, and we're going to get to all the political stuff, so we have some time here to do that. So this isn't just going to be an interview about personal stuff, but people have a lot of questions about the trespassing allegations. The first one here is, you know, you wanted to watch a Super Bowl with your son. That's a pretty good dad to me. That's what that sounds like. But you knew that according to the agreement in your divorce, that you weren't supposed to be at your wife's house. How did that end up taking place? Did your son call you? Hey, come over, Dad. What happened?
Yeah, what happened was, we were there at Chad Waldorf is a buddy of mine for a long time, and he's always had a neighborhood Super Bowl party there on Sullivan's Island. He has it every year, and there is a big group that goes to the event. We were among them. And you're there for the first half, and with any big group, you spend a lot of time talking to grown-ups as well as young people. And we get to the halftime, and he's like, Dad, I want to go. I don't want to watch it here. There are just too many people. And, he's our youngest boy. He's 14. He loves football. He's the only guy that plays football. And so you try and reach your former wife. She's out of town and flying back that night. You can't reach her, and you got to make a call as a dad. And you say, am I going to let him sit there and watch the game alone, or I'm going to go in and watch it with him? I thought it was in the best interest of him as a boy. You know, the Super Bowl comes around once a year, and so you sit there and you watch it. I didn't try and sneak out of the house. I didn't try and hide what had happened. Waited till when Jenny got back. We met there on the back porch. It sounds creepy. I mean, the way this thing was laid out by the media,
it's like
I was there with you, the hedge, sort of sneaking, trying to break in a window or something. But no, met her, told her what had happened, and it is what it is. Some people like it, some people don't. But what I do think is important is that people be a bit more reticent about quickly forming judgment, as the media so often likes to do. I mean, the idea of throwing on the front page of the paper when they don't know all the facts, they don't know all the circumstances, and the only thing that they go with is some creepy-sounding report like you're wandering through the hedge with your cell phone camera light trying to sneak into a house, paints a very different and frankly quite creepy picture that would rightfully offend and concern a lot of folks when people realize the context. Oh, wait, he's with his son. He's taking his son back to the house. He's got to make a call on leaving the son there to watch the game alone or not. That's a very different picture. And I think it, again, highlights at times the way the media will go out without a full layout of the facts just because they want to, at times, sell newspapers, with all due respect.
So just explain the cell phone part to me, because that did make it sound kind of weird when it came out. Why were you under the light of your cell phone when you were talking to Jenny? Were you in the driveway?
No, in the back steps, because again, there isn't a light back there, and it's relatively dark, and so again, facts can be arranged in any of these things to make them look creepy or make them look completely right. But in other words, it's relatively dark, and it had the cell phone light to go down the steps. They're dark steps, and I guess as I age, I want to know where those steps are as opposed to falling. Okay,
so at the time, I mean, your wife and you, at least judging from what I've read in the media, seem to have a pretty cordial relationship as of January. I mean, you talked out running for Congress. You and I have talked about that before in interviews, Mark Sanford. So was she super mad that night? Did she say, I'm going to go to court?
Yeah, she said this is against our rules and I'm going to file something. I said, that's fair enough. You got to do whatever you got to do, and we can let somebody decide it. I think I made the call I had to make. She thinks otherwise, and that's fair enough. That's what makes the world go round. But I do think that it goes back to the law. I spent Easter Sunday there at the beach. It's not as if there's some kind of war. It's just,
Wait, so you spent Easter Sunday at the beach house?
Yes.
With your wife?
And the boys.
And the boys.
Yeah. So it's...
But you have a court date pending on May 9th. To hash this out, but you and your wife are on good enough terms to spend Easter Sunday together.
Yeah.
So did you say to her, Jenny, could we just handle this in person? Why, well, let's just get rid of the court date.
I don't want to go into. I don't want to go into all. But I just say this goes back to the larger issue of all domestic matters, whether it's a divorced couple and folks trying to figure it out as best they can on how they parent, or whether it's a family that's intact. In every one of these instances, they are more complicated than meets the eye. And what you have to recognize, unless there's violence or something crazy going on, that generally people have one aim in mind, which is how do we continue this process of parenting as best we can, whether we're together as a couple or apart as a couple, because at the end of the day, I know she loves our boys and I know I love our boys, and you do as best you can.
Mark Sanford, I do want to ask you this, though. She said there was a pattern of you trespassing on the property. Could you address that? Tell us what is that about?
Again, in fairness to her and to the boys, I don't want to go into all that. Okay. I just say, again, it's much more complicated than that. And what I would say is, I never got an attorney when our divorce came along. And so, period. And so ours was rather unconventional in that it didn't have a lot of the structure that a lot of these things have, because I didn't get an attorney. And we've been ferreting out. I think we got it figured out now. And again, I won't go to the house anywhere close to the house. I don't imagine you period. Will. But I would say a lot of couples got to figure this stuff out if they're formal couples. And anyway, I think we got to figure it out and leave it alone at that. I got a lot of campaign and issues related questions for you coming. I promise I do, but I have to ask you, or the listeners will be screaming at me through their radios, about Jenny Sanford's comments to the Washington Post about your boys meeting your fiance for the first time in front of the cameras, and that this visibly upset them. Could you comment on that? No, I don't want to go in the soap opera. What I'd say is, yes, there was one boy, in other words, there that she hadn't met, and that is what it is. Could you react to the NRCC pulling their support of you? It seemed they did that before you even had a chance to explain yourself about the trespassing allegations. What is up with that? Yeah, I what I would say is that, with all due respect to the NRCC, I didn't make it through the primary. I didn't make it through the runoff with their help. This is the same group that has been at times spineless with regard to standing up to Obama and to a lot of spending policies that a lot of conservatives are very frustrated with here. And I would say that they're going to do whatever they're going to do. I would prefer. So I don't think it's any great loss, save for the fact that it sends a wrong signal. And what I would say is, I think that, again, it goes back to that larger notion of people forming opinions and making decisions without knowing all the facts. And I think that at times when it goes to domestic issues, to go into all the facts is to hurt boys that nobody wants to hurt in our instance, or to hurt family members that people don't want to hurt. And so you leave it alone. But they decided what they want to do. I would have preferred to have said, hey, let me tell you the larger context here, rather than just reading about some creepy, supposed person wandering around with a flashlight in the hedges. But that's what they decided to do. Yeah, that sounds like a very different story from the one that we have read in the newspaper. Mark Sanford, I want to ask you about, let's start with this. Nancy Pelosi has apparently decided to take you out at the knees because she wants to be speaker. I saw an article that said they would drop $1 million into this district to get Elizabeth Colbert Bush elected. And we know that her PAC alone spend over $200,000 on commercials running against you. They started yesterday. One of the things Pat Caddell said, a Democrat strategist, when I just interviewed him, is it doesn't seem like that your campaign has been able to mount much of a response at this time. Are you going to have the money to fight back? Are you going to be able to effectively counter it, do you think? No, I'm not going to have their kind of money. They're putting $1 million into $1 million. So you tell me how you can be independent when Nancy Pelosi's PAC, a couple of days ago committed $370,000 to this race. The DCC, however you say it, Democratic Congressional Committee, Campaign Committee, committed roughly another $200,000, I think, yesterday. All told, you add it up, it adds up to $1 million. They ain't doing that to get a voice of independence in Washington, D.C. They're doing it to get another hard vote for Nancy Pelosi. In fact, my opponent, one of their first procedural votes, significant procedural votes, would be to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. And, you know, I just think that you look at this district, you look at where people in this along the coast come from with regard to spending and other issues, and I think it is just plain absurd to think that they can step in and buy this race. But that's what they're going to try and do. And the only thing that will set it off is for folks to say, you know, every time I hear one of their ads, every time I get one of their news mailings, I'm going to make it a point to call 10 friends. I'm going to make it a point to, you know, to email 10 friends. Because otherwise, yeah, it's going to be very tough because you can't be outspent 5-1 in the world of politics and have good things happen. They can go and paint any kind of picture that they want based on, you know, a whole lot of air power over the airwaves. And it frankly goes to the heart of this somewhat stealth campaign that Elizabeth has run to date. We've consistently asked for open debates. Let's do as we did in the Republican primary. We had, I would hate to know how many different forums and debates we had. They got ridiculously old after a while. But that needs to take place. That public process of saying, where do you stand on this issue versus where this other person stands on issue is ultimately what the democratic process is about, and it's not taking place in this general election.
We'll get to that in more in just a minute, Mark. Right here is one of the mailers that Nancy Pelosi has paid to send to the homes of women throughout the district, and here's what it says. We paid for Mark Sanford's luxury travel to China, Europe, and even Argentina, and they have $63,000 for jets in Europe, $21,000 for first-class tickets to China. Sounds like you were having $3,300 to visit his mistress. Now, that sounds like you were on a travel tour. They don't say what you were doing there, only that you were traveling and having a good time. What is your response to this? What is the is there a rest of the story on this?
Yeah, there's always a rest of the story. And you know, this is I mean, it's just flat out wrong. I mean, here's the simple, what it's designed to do is it's to take a couple of different facts, arrange them as you see put, to paint whatever kind of picture you want to paint. And so I think that if there's anything that stands out about my track record in my time in office, I'm an imperfect human being. I had the implosion of 2009. Everybody knows about it. We've talked about it ad nauseum. But what also stands out is I was rated #1 in the whole United States Congress in votes to limit federal spending and limit federal taxation. I was rated the same by, you know, Citizens Against Government Waste. I was rated as financially the most conservative governor in the United States of America. I was the first governor to turn back stimulus money. I mean, I can give you a long list of different merit badges. If there's one thing that I believed in, the whole reason I got into politics in the first place was because I believe government spends too much money. It's way too deep in my pocketbook. And I think that if we continue to spend as we are, our civilization will fall. It is what has driven my time in politics. So what they're trying to do is to paint a picture opposite of what it is. The fact on travel is I spent 1/2. Now think about this. Now we're not talking about 5%, 10%, 15% off. I spent 1/2 of what any of any of my predecessor governors spent on travel. 1/2. I have the lowest spending record on travel of any governorship in the last 30 years in South Carolina history, which is in essence as far back as they go to keeping books on the travel front. I did a lot of things to go the extra mile, whether it is, and you could have this validated, when I would go on these trips, I would sleep in the same hotel room with other staff.
And what were you doing on these trips? What were you there?
I mean, we were going after economic development deals.
Like Nikki Haley does.
Right, like Nikki Haley does, like every other governor's done. But again, spending 1/2 of what other governorships have spent, bunking in the room with other, members of the Department of Commerce to try and save money. And we saw more effect out of the 1/2 that we spent than any other governorship over an 8-year time period, because we saw more cumulative investment come to the state of South Carolina, $23 billion in total number, including the Boeing deal, including, did I take a trip? They didn't leave it on this flyer that you have here. Mention Europe here. Did I take a trip, several trips to Rome? Absolutely. And it was to secure the Alenia original $600 million investment here in Charleston, which was the ultimate beachhead to Boeing coming here. So if you were to talk to Enzo Caiazzo, he would tell you that one of the reasons, he would argue that largely the reason they came here is because of the relationship that we formed with them, that Bob Faith formed with them, that made them feel comfortable in again investing that original $600 million in South Carolina. So what I'd say is you can pick apart the record, but look at the whole, and the whole is half of what other governors spent on travel. And look at what the byproduct of that travel was, which was cumulatively more investment than during any other in South Carolina history. I'd also make two other points. One is it's misleading. The way they get to this $450,000 number here on your thing is they take all of the state plane travel that I did over 8 years.
And this is Nancy Pelosi mailer that's gone out to women in the district.
All the state travel that I did over 8 years.
They say you spent $450,000 for your travel.
But make it sound like those are overseas. No, that includes all use of the state plane in South Carolina as you were going to, an economic development opening in Gaffney, or as you were flying for the, opening of the Hard Rock Cafe in Myrtle Beach, or you were going to, deal with a tragedy over there in Aiken when there was a chemical spill. I mean, every one of those trips gets emboldened into those numbers, and it makes it look as if, you're going around the world. No, a teeny little fraction of that was in fact tied to these overseas economic development trips that every governor has taken. So it's misleading, and we'll see whether or not it sticks. Let me add two other things on travel, just as I'm on the soapbox. I sold off the corporate jet when I got there. We saved over $1 million in that. I was the first governor in South Carolina history to travel on the little single-engine Cessna plane rather than the twin-engine King Air to save money. And the audit showed that I saved taxpayers $60,000 in doing that. I discontinued the practice of relocating the state plane, and the audit showed that we saved $70,000 in doing that. I mean, I could go down a laundry list of different ways in which I tried to do what I've always tried to do in the world of politics, and that's watch out for somebody's pocketbook or wallet.
Mark Sanford, I want to ask you a question. It is the main thing I hear as an objection to you when people call, and they say this: he abandoned us as governor. He walked out. He left us. We didn't know where he was. I've never known what to say to them when they call. And I often point out, well, it was a weekend, first of all.
Right. But it was.
But there are 2 other days in there.
Yeah.
Could you address that?
Well, what I would say is this, and I haven't tried to get around it. I said, look, I totally failed in that point of life. I grant you that. The nature of an affair is that you try and hide it. There's no getting around that. But, what I also know is there was a back channel way of getting a hold of me. They called me down there. I changed my flight. I came back home. In other words, nobody was abandoned.
You were still reachable.
I was still reachable. I was reached, and I came home. And that doesn't in any way, again, make right what I did, how I handled that chapter of life, but it also doesn't change it to a story wherein you somehow, quote, abandon the state.
One of the questions I have had from people who've emailed me, many of them your supporters,
sure,
have said that you knew the rules of your divorce, and while a lot of people seem to feel that you did the right thing as a father, they say it also shows that you broke the rules, that you didn't feel that they applied to you. And they also say, did you know this was out there and could damage your candidacy, and yet you ran anyway? Could you address that as far as the trespassing allegations just quickly?
Yeah, I mean,
and this is feedback from our emailers.
Fair enough. But think about this. If you have documents that are sealed, because both Jenny and I agree, whatever our differences as a formerly married couple, we think that we ought to handle them personally as opposed to over the airwaves. Because you want to talk about hurting boys, have this whole debate, have it on the front page of the paper a couple of times. And for that reason, they were sealed. Now, I won't even go into the weirdness of how, quote, sealed documents somehow miraculously show up 2.5 weeks before an election.
Do you think your wife released them? She did talk to the Washington Post.
No, I'm not saying any, but I'm just saying somehow that happened. And so I want to be clear. I'm not blaming Jenny. I'm not saying no. I'm not. I'm saying the opposite. For whatever reason, there was some snafu, and they came out. But that wasn't anything that I would have anticipated, because all I knew is that the record had been sealed. in as my and Jenny's mutual way of protecting the boys from having this very discussion.
Mark Sanford, you know, my personal frustration is that we have audio right here of Elizabeth Colbert Bush, your opponent, saying to union leaders, I'm going to be your voice in Washington. The voices of the unions are not being heard. I'm going to be your voice in Washington. And I am tremendously frustrated that the people of this district who don't listen to WTMA have no idea. Are you going to be able to effectively run the rest of this campaign, get the word out on that, and tell people who Elizabeth Colbert Bush is?
Absolutely.
Do you have money coming in to do it?
Yeah. And, you know, I got an interesting call this morning early from a fellow who said, you don't understand how important it is that we not have a union-oriented representative in Washington for the 1st Congressional District, because Boeing could very easily, he was making this point, I don't know if it's true or not, but this is the point this gentleman was making, could actually ultimately very easily go union if you have a representative that's an advocate for that sort of thing. If that happened, his point was economic development here in the Lowcountry would dry up, because much of Boeing's presence, I think one could argue, is tied to the fact that we are a right-to-work state, and a lot of the different suppliers, a lot of other companies would be impacted if they were to be impacted based on unionization of that shop. And so we'll see what happens, but I think it's very important, and I think it again goes back to this notion of there are no free lunches in the world of politics, and the idea that the Democratic Party is shipping in $1 million to support her candidacy, and the reason that unions are drawing the line in the sand as they are on this one is basically they're saying, look, if Boeing can ship jobs out of the Northwest to a place like South Carolina, and they're a big concern, you know, a number of other people and a number of other companies might just do the same. So we're going to try and make this 1st district a real referendum in terms of what happens on that. You got two things going on. Unions who view it as a very important line in the sand, and you got the first special election since Obama was reelected, and he has a goal of winning the House in 2014 so that he can become a legacy president and have all 3 branches of government working toward that legacy over the last 2 years. I think, again, that's why the Democrats are putting as much money as they are into this race. So I think it makes it that much more important that working people really make their voices heard on this one and talk to friends, email friends, because if not, we're going to be outgunned from the standpoint of a lot of union money and a lot of Democratic money.
Do you have money coming into your campaign, Mark Sanford? Because we know the NRCC has bailed. I know they weren't putting a lot in,
those
but do you
guys
have
never
money coming in?
a penny of my race all the way through the primary and all the way through the runoff. We were able to raise the requisite resources to do just well in that campaign, and we're going to raise the money we need to get a message out. Now, we will still be outgunned when you got Democrats putting in $1 million into the race trying to buy the 1st Congressional District, and that's why, again, everybody out there can make a difference if they talk to friends, email friends, every time they see one of those ads or get one of those flyers, because I'm not going to be able to do it to the extent that they can, but I may have enough money to get a message out, because there are a lot of great supporters who mind you, I mean, I carry this around with me. It's a Monday night reception that was held this Monday night, given by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, given by Congressman Joseph Kennedy III, given by Congressman Sandy Livin, 37 representatives on this thing. Al Franken.
All Democrats,
all the
Washington
Democrats gave this fundraiser.
I know,
with
I'm
event
frustrated. I don't want this woman to go to Washington.
$10,000 a person, and event co-chairs at $5,000 a person. And so, I mean, yeah, they got some juice that I don't have, but I got regular working folks throwing in $50 and $25 and $75, and enough people do that long enough, we get there. That's how we got there in the first 2 races. That's how I intend to get there here in the 3rd one.
All right, Mark Sanford, we got about 30 seconds left. You want to make a pitch?
Yeah, I'd just simply say, help me to prevent the Democrats from buying this seat. They may have $1 million, but again, what I hear when I wander around Charleston, I was up in Somerville yesterday evening for the Thursday evening thing they do on Main Street, and people were coming up to me and saying, in a lot of ways, this whole stuff, the dropping of this thing, coming out 2.5 weeks before the campaign, whatnot, is a reason for me to work that much harder, and I ask listeners to do the same.